In this video, I'm going to be focusing specifically on queer representation within media. Now, I know queer representation is quite broad, especially considering the limited amount of time that I've been given, so I have created an essay question that we will unpack throughout this video. To what extent do large streaming platforms such as Netflix and Disney affect the representation of queer characters in teen/young persons animated shows? I know that probably sounds like a lot to take in right now, but hopefully by the end of this video, you'll understand where I'm coming from. Okay, so before we get into this question, what actually is representation? Representation is pretty much how a type of media text portrays a specific group or community. For example, how a TV show might portray a queer character. I've also picked out a few key terms that might be important to know in reference to this topic. We have mediation, selection, and ideology. Pause this video to read the definitions. The first Disney Plus show that really stood out to me in terms of queer representation was The Owl House. The Owl House is an animated fantasy comedy created by Dana Terrace, who directed the 2017 reboot of DuckTales and storyboarded on Gravity Falls. The main plot of the show is about a teenage girl who accidentally finds herself in a magical realm instead of going to summer camp like she was supposed to. She befriends a witch named Ida and a demon named King, and soon realizes that that is exactly where she belongs. During its season 2 run, The Owl House was cancelled despite its perfect ratings and dedicated fandom. This led to speculation as to why The Owl House was cancelled and who should be held responsible. Since the cancellation, there has been a number of articles surrounding the same speculation. An article by Laura Gray explains that, according to Dana, at the end of the day, there are a few business people who oversee what fits into the Disney brand, and one day one of those guys decided The Owl House didn't fit that brand. The story is serialized. Our audience skews older, and that just didn't fit this one guy's taste. That's it. Really grinds my guts, bores my brain, kicks my shins. It sucks, but it is what it is. Every article that I've read so far mentions Disney's "didn't fit with our brand" excuse. I find this interesting because as a consumer, I don't expect a company like Disney to explain their reasoning for cancelling a show, but I know that their brand excuse had to be fabricated and worded specifically in an attempt to reduce the amount of backlash the company was inevitably going to receive. Now, it's no surprise that most fans believe Disney's real reason for cancelling the show is due to the fact that some of the teen characters are queer. And of course, let's not forget the iconic Season 2 Lumity kiss scene, which I'm sure Disney weren't too keen on. This possible reason is only a speculation though, and even if there was proof, we all know Disney would never be stupid enough to openly admit to the suppression of young queer people. Before we move on to my next point, let's refer back to my original question. To what extent implies that we are not talking about whether or not these streaming platforms actually affect queer representation, because we already know they do, but instead the question is trying to provoke a conversation about how much effect they have, and what this means for young queer people who consume the media they choose to stream. Do large streaming platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus hold responsibility for how they represent queer people, or do they actually have the right to say, sorry, this just doesn't fit with our brand? I mean, of course they have the right to say that if they want to, but is it morally right? To me, it just feels like another excuse to protect teens and young people from queer representation and exposure without actually taking responsibility. I believe that if a person or a company has a platform where consumers will be influenced, they automatically have a responsibility whether they like it or not, and this is even more necessary if the platform has a larger audience. Some people might argue that this entire situation was just a one-off and that maybe it's unfair to accuse Disney of something that only happened once. This could be a valid point if Disney had truly only done this once, but the show Star vs. the Forces of Evil is a perfect example of Disney's ideology seeping into the shows they choose to stream. Star vs. the Forces of Evil is definitely one of my favorite shows. I used to watch it when I was younger and recently decided it needed a rewatch. I think that the main reason why it's one of my favorite shows is because of how strange and quirky the whole concept is. Throughout the show, they include subtle hints of queer representation, which definitely could be intentional, but there has been speculation that the creators could have been pressured by Disney to limit the amount of queer referencing, possibly due to its younger audience. It's no surprise that Disney have the power to use tactical censoring to make sure their shows are matching their brand, so you can't blame us for speculating when a popular show is cancelled with no obvious reason. Star vs. the Forces of Evil ended with season 4. In this last season, the show reveals that Jackie has a girlfriend, which I think is definitely one of the best scenes in the show. Now, there hasn't been any main characters prior to this that have been confirmed to be queer, which once again could be Disney's attempt at minimizing the amount of queer characters, although this is something we are only able to speculate on as there's really just no solid proof. It does make me question though that maybe the reason the show explicitly reveals Jackie being queer in the last season could be because the show's creators knew there really wouldn't be any consequences, as they were already aware of the fact they were getting cancelled. Before I move on to Netflix, I want to throw out a couple questions that I think are important to think about when it comes to this topic. Is Disney doing all of this consciously as a way of making sure they still look good as a company, as well as simultaneously trying their hardest to reduce the amount of queer exposure that teen and young people get on the platform? What I mean by this is they're still letting a limited amount of queer people be in some of the shows they stream, which I'm assuming they do so they aren't accused of being homophobic, and in theory this means they get less backlash. But honestly, as a company, the decisions they're making, like cancelling certain shows, just feels so disingenuous and honestly doesn't look good for the brand. I feel like this situation is kind of similar to when shows just add in a queer character to make themselves look good, but in reality it's just forced diversity. Like, the character will be this stereotype and their whole personality will be the fact that they're queer, which is just really damaging to the LGBTQ+ community because that's just not how representation works. Like, you can't just add a queer character for the sake of making your show look better. The next show I want to mention is Dead End Paranormal Park. It's streamed on Netflix and is honestly the best queer representation I've seen from an animated show aimed at kids, which actually shocked me quite a bit considering it's a Netflix series. The show includes Barney, a trans male protagonist, along with his queer neurodivergent friend Norma. The show also includes non-binary representation as well. As a whole, Dead End Paranormal Park deals with some very real issues that actually happen to young queer people, and the way they represent it is incredibly powerful. The series was created by Hamish Steele and is based off a graphic novel he wrote called Dead Endia. The show is truly amazing, and I only wish I had had the opportunity to watch it when I was younger. If we compare Netflix and Disney, the first thing I notice is that Disney seems to be more experimental when it comes to the types of shows they choose to stream on their platform. This could be because of the recent high demand for representation in animated shows. This does make me wonder though, does any of this accurately represent the views Netflix hold as a company, or is this all simply for streams? An article by Marcus Ratton talks about Hamish's experience working with Netflix. Despite recent controversy surrounding Netflix and its approach to LGBTQ+ lives, from cutting LGBTQ+ jobs to giving Ricky Gervais a platform to air his transphobia, Hamish's experience of producing Dead End has been positive. Despite Netflix's attempt at being more experimental and allowing shows like Dead End to be streamed, the controversy that was mentioned in the article have me questioning how genuine Netflix are really being. You can't just give someone like Ricky Gervais a platform to air his transphobia and then stream a show like Dead End and expect everyone to forgive you. Don't get me wrong, the fact that Dead End is being streamed in the first place is amazing and does feel like a step in the right direction, but what's important to me is that Netflix's intentions are in the right place, and if I'm being honest, it doesn't quite feel like they are at the moment. Netflix do hold a huge responsibility due to their massive audience engagement, so they should be aware of the influence they have. Something that I hope will come out of Netflix streaming a show like Dead End is that they are setting an example for other platforms that will hopefully begin streaming shows like Dead End too. Overall, I believe the effect large streaming platforms have on the representation of queer characters is huge. This is even more prominent for teen/young person's animated shows due to the controversy surrounding what adults deem is appropriate and should/shouldn't be allowed in them. I do think that Netflix and Disney are aware of their responsibility, but I doubt it's taken as seriously as it should. All of this being said, I hope that at some point in the near future there is a push on the amount of queer representation within animated shows. I just think that there's so much potential and there is an obvious demand for it, as we can see from the impressive feedback that The Owl House, Star vs. the Forces of Evil and Dead End Paranormal Park have received.